trial and execution of Socrates in Athens is one of the most significant events in Western philosophical history, marking a turning point in the relationship between the individual and the state, and between philosophy and society. This narrative delves into the complex factors leading to Socrates' trial, the charges brought against him, the nature of his defense, and the profound impact his death had on Athenian society and Western thought. Socrates, born around 470–469 BCE in Athens, was a prominent philosopher known for his method of inquiry, which involved asking probing questions to stimulate critical thinking and expose contradictions in his interlocutor's beliefs. Despite not having written any philosophical texts himself, his thoughts and methods were preserved through the writings of his students, most notably Plato. Athens during Socrates' lifetime was a city-state with a complex and tumultuous political history. It had experienced the heights of democratic governance under Pericles, but also the devastation of the Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BCE, against Sparta, which ended in Athens' defeat. The aftermath of the war saw significant political instability, including the brief but brutal oligarchic rule of the 30 tyrants and the subsequent restoration of democracy. Socrates lived through these upheavals, and his relationships with some of the controversial figures of the time, as well as his challenging of traditional beliefs, would play a significant role in his trial. In 399 BCE, Socrates was brought to trial on charges of impiety, asserting, and corrupting the youth of Athens. The specific accusations were that he did not believe in the gods of the city and that he introduced new deities. Additionally, he was accused of corrupting the young men of Athens by encouraging them to question established norms and values, which was seen as a threat to the stability of the state. The formal charges were brought by 3 citizens: Miletus, a young poet who was the principal accuser; Anytus, a powerful politician and supporter of the restored democracy; and Lycon, a rhetorician. While the charges were ostensibly religious, they were deeply intertwined with political and social concerns. Socrates had been associated with several figures who were seen as enemies of the democratic state, including Critias, one of the leaders of the 30 tyrants, and Alcibiades, a controversial general and politician. Although Socrates was not directly involved in their actions, his perceived influence on them and his questioning of democratic principles made him a target for those seeking to protect the state from further turmoil. The trial of Socrates took place in the Athenian courts, which were large, public, and involved a jury of 501 male citizens. The trial was not presided over by a judge in the modern sense, but by the jurors themselves, who listened to the arguments and then voted on the verdict and, if necessary, the punishment. Socrates, representing himself, delivered a defense speech that has been immortalized in Plato's Apology. Rather than offering a conventional defense, Socrates used the opportunity to question the very basis of the charges against him and to challenge the jurors to consider the broader implications of their decision. He argued that he had spent his life pursuing a divine mission to encourage Athenians to care more for virtue and wisdom than for wealth and power. He denied the charges of introducing new gods, explaining that his references to a divine sign or daemonion were not a new deity but a personal, spiritual voice that guided his actions.
Regarding the accusation of corrupting the youth, Socrates pointed out that no one had come forward to testify that he had been harmed by his teachings, and he questioned why the parents of the allegedly corrupted young men were not among his accusers. He also argued that corruption, if it occurred, was unintentional, and therefore, according to Athenian law, he should be educated rather than punished. Socrates' approach to his defense was uncompromising. He did not seek to appease the jury by pleading for mercy or by calling upon his family to evoke sympathy. Instead, he maintained his stance that he was fulfilling a moral duty to challenge complacency and ignorance, even if it put him at odds with the state. After hearing Socrates' defense, the jury voted on the verdict. The outcome was close, but Socrates was found guilty by a margin of 280 to 221. Following the guilty verdict, the jury had to decide on the punishment. In Athenian law, both the prosecution and the defendant could propose a penalty, and the jury would choose between the two. The prosecution called for the death penalty. Socrates, however, did not propose an alternative punishment in the conventional sense. Initially, he suggested that, as a benefactor to the city, he deserved to be rewarded with free meals for life at the Prytaneum, a privilege typically reserved for Olympic victors. This suggestion was seen as provocative and further alienated the jury. When pressed, Socrates proposed a fine, but by then, the jury had been sufficiently angered to opt for the death penalty, which was imposed by a larger margin than the initial guilty verdict. Socrates was sentenced to die by consuming a drink containing poison hemlock, a common method of execution in Athens. He was held in prison for about 30 days before the sentence was carried out. This delay was due to a religious festival, during which executions were not permitted. Plato's Phaedo provides a vivid account of Socrates' final hours. Surrounded by his friends and disciples, Socrates remained calm and composed, engaging in philosophical discussions until the very end. He discussed the immortality of the soul and the philosopher's duty to seek truth and wisdom. When the time came, Socrates drank the hemlock without hesitation, and as the poison took effect, he continued to speak until he could no longer do so. His last words were addressed to his friend Crito. We owe a cock to Asclepius. Do pay it. Don't forget this reference to the god of healing has been interpreted in various ways, but it is often seen as a final, ironic comment on the release of the soul from the body. Plato, one of Socrates' most devoted students, was deeply affected by his mentor's death. He dedicated much of his life to preserving and promoting Socratic philosophy through his dialogues, many of which feature Socrates as the central character. These works have been instrumental in shaping Western philosophy and have ensured that Socrates' ideas and methods continue to be studied and debated to this day. The trial and execution of Socrates have also been interpreted as a cautionary tale about the dangers of democracy when it is swayed by populism, fear, and prejudice. Socrates' willingness to die for his principles has been celebrated as an enduring example of intellectual integrity and moral courage. In conclusion, the story of Socrates' trial and execution is a powerful narrative that highlights the tension between the individual and the state, the role of philosophy in society, and the enduring questions of justice, truth, and the good life. Socrates' legacy lives on, not only through the philosophical ideas he inspired, but also as a symbol of the enduring struggle for freedom of thought and expression.